5 years ago, somebody said on one of my shows that I was talking about like plant medicines and ayahuascas, and they said, breathing can get you to those states. And I was like, you're crazy. And honestly, I never thought breathing could ever do anything. And then you saw people like Wim Hof come onto the scene and all these different breathing techniques. And I think, Patrick, people are starting to take breathing seriously.
I think so.
But I know most of your life, you were banging on the door saying, everybody wake up.
Yes.
This is really serious stuff. It can affect your child development, your sleep, your health, your everything. But you spent a lot of your career trying to get people to wake up, right?
Just to a large degree, I had a motive here because from a child into my teenage years, into my mid-20s, I had chronic nasal obstruction. I was a chronic mouth breather, and I had chronic asthma. And if you have inflammation of the lungs, it's not just isolated to the lungs. Because now, since 2007, researchers have identified it as one airway. So your nose, your throat, your lungs are all linked. And if there's a problem with one, it can travel up to the other and vice versa. And the thing about the nose is, if you have nasal obstruction, if you have a stuffy nose, you're twice as likely to have a sleep problem. So here as a kid, I was having asthma, I was caught for breath. Because I was having asthma, I had also nasal obstruction because it's very common that the two go hand in hand. And because of that, then I was mouth breathing, and then my sleep is impacted. And of course, I'm breathing fast upper chest. I'm constantly in fight or flight response. Now, you send a child into school with that breathing pattern. And that child, in primary school, I was bright. I was top of the class. Come secondary school, high school, I dropped from the top of the class right down to the bottom. I was losing interest in school. In 1988, I left school altogether. And people are probably shocked with that. Why is a kid at 14 years of age leaving school? My parents were realists because they were seeing that if a child doesn't want to continue, and also the measurement of intelligence and success is not necessarily based on academic ability. Many people have high academic qualifications, high academic intelligence, and they have achieved very little. Creative people, intuition, and there's other aspects of intelligence that is not taught through the educational system. I had a bit of drive with me, but I had poor health. So make a long story short, actually we went back to school a year later, and I drove myself through school, got into university, got into Trinity College in Dublin, which is a pretty decent college to get into. I had to spend 10 hours a day studying. That's what I did. So my motive is, it was my breathing that was holding me back. It wasn't my intelligence. It was my chronic mouth breathing. And I was going to doctors every 3 months. I was in hospital a few times. Not one healthcare professional during that time says, Patrick, breathe through your nose. In early 2000s, probably 1998, 1999, I came across a newspaper article. And the newspaper article spoke about a Russian doctor, and he said two things. He says, breathe through your nose and you breathe light. And as a chronic mouth breather, I was doing none of those things. I was breathing through my mouth. I was often caught for breath, and I had fast, noticeable breathing. Not that you're having an asthma attack all the time or a panic attack, but that your breathing is in excess of what it should be. And this is the crux of it. When I switched to nasal breathing, my sleep within 2 to 3 days, I woke up more alert than I had in the previous 10 to 15 years. That's not an exaggeration.
10 to 15 years?
Yes.
Just from better sleep?
Just from better sleep. And this, even though I found it purely by accident, I actually taped up the first night, taped my mouths, and because my nose was so stuffy, I was able to unblock it using breath hold techniques, but I also had to get nasal dilators to open up my nose. So you can imagine the first night, I had a nasal dilator on my nose, I had tape on my mouth to force myself to breathe through my nose, and it took me a couple of days just to get the hang of it. Then I started waking up my alert. My wheezing reduced by about 50% in that week. Now, this was driving me. I wanted to get it out there. So I have
no medications. All you did was force yourself to breathe through your nose.
Change my breathing.
Now you
patterns.
just said taped your mouth like it's like it was casual, but most people are going to be freaked out and saying, "What? You tape your mouth closed when you go to sleep?" I've heard a few people mention that before, but that is shocking to a lot of people, right?
It's huge.
Right. And you've also taped your daughter's mouth shut. And we're going to get into the kids' stuff as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Right?
Yes.
I feel like you walk around the neighborhood sneaking into people's houses and taping their mouths. But it probably would make for a better...
Well, we've created a momentum here. Okay. Taping of the mouth now is becoming more mainstream. It's not just in the fringes.
I've heard of it.
If you see now, there's products on the market, and we'll have our own product coming on the market for children, because it's always been the issue. I always wanted to get kids, how do we get children breathing through their noses? If we let a child continue to mouth breathe, it's going to impact the craniofacial development. It's going to result in malocclusion of the teeth, crooked teeth, because the mouth isn't closed and the tongue isn't resting in the roof of the mouth. We need a growing child to have their lips together, to breathe through their nose, both during wakefulness and during sleep, and with correct resting tongue posture of being in the roof of the mouth. It's the tongue in the roof of the mouth that exerts a pressure to drive the jaws forward on the face to make room for the airway. The mouth-breathing child, they don't have the counteracting force of the tongue, and as a result, their jaws are developed set back, and as a result, their airway is compromised. And their airway isn't compromised just during childhood. Their airway is compromised for the rest of their life. We talk about obstructive sleep apnea, and we talk about an epidemic that's out there now. 43% of males aged between 50 and 70, 27% of females aged between 50 and 70, 26% of males aged between 30 and 49, and 9% of females aged between 30 and 49.
Have apnea of some sort.
Sleep disorder breathing and at high risk of obstructive sleep apnea. And that's a European, Swiss, relatively recent study.
Wow.
Now, could that be absolutely resolved? Yes, if we looked at breathing during childhood. And this is really where we want to get to the crux of it, because it has been absolutely overlooked. We know studied, statistics looking at children, 25 to 50% of studied children persistently mouth breathe. And if a child is mouth breathing, their sleep is impacted. And if their sleep is impacted, they have 40% chance of developing ADD, ADHD, and or a learning disability.
So you think it's all sleep related?
Sleep and breathing go together.